this episode of the Naturist Living Show, an artist in residence in a naturist club.
This episode of the Naturist Living Show is brought to you by Bare Oaks Family Naturist Park. At Bare Oaks, we offer traditional naturist values in a modern setting. Free your body, free your mind. www.bareoaks.ca.
Welcome, dear listener, to episode 99 of the Naturist Living Show. And if you have been listening regularly, you know we've had a program called the Naked State Artist Residency at Bare Oaks. There were 2 episodes where we talked to the organizer in one and the artists who participated, and that was the first time in 2016. And then this year, in 2017, we did it again. Yeah, it was also very successful, and we'll be doing it in 2018. And I certainly plan on having it be a regular event. It's wonderful to have creative people in the naturist environment learning about us and us learning about them, and it brings a certain energy, and it helps us understand ourselves. Through art, you often question and see things differently. You may not always like what they do, but if it gets you thinking and talking, it can help communicate the ideas behind naturism and ethical naturism, and Bare Oaks, of course, because that's where it's happening. So Teresa, who organizes the Naked State Art Residency at Bare Oaks, got a contact from Barry Sykes in the UK. He is an artist, and he had created his own art residency because he was already working on a program called Radical Essex, which is a part of the UK, and where he was looking into all kinds of sort of weird, quirky, unusual, non-traditional things that were happening in the Essex area. And in that were several naturist clubs, including one, the Oakwood Sun Club. And he convinced them to actually do a residency specifically in their club, where he wasn't a naturist himself, but he learned about naturism, and I believe he himself became a naturist. But I'll let you judge that for yourself.
Hi, my name is Barry Sykes. I'm an artist based in London, and I'm currently artist in residence at Oakwood Sun Club, which is a naturist club on the sort of very eastern borders of London, and then going into Essex, a county that runs between the city of London and the east coast of England.
Very good. And so, tell me a little bit about the Sun Club. How long has it been there, and what does it look like?
It's been, I think it was founded in 1962 or 63. You encounter it, and I vividly remember encountering it the first time by walking up first time I went there was by bus, so it was a kind of sort of adventure tramping through the undergrowth on the edge of the M25, which is the motorway that runs around the edge of London. It's defined as the perimeter of London. So there's a slip road that comes off that, and hidden away, you wouldn't notice it otherwise, is there's a metal gate with a small little carved wood sign on saying Oakwood. And if you get through that gate, then up a kind of path through a meadow which runs parallel to the motorway. You can see all the cars and the signs and the lights and everything literally the other side of a hedge as you walk up to the main gates. And through that gate, you'll find quite a simple setup, and I don't think much changed over the decades of a clubhouse, small clubhouse with a rudimentary kitchen in. They try and keep a very kind of low profile in the landscape. There's something very sort of a mix of financial necessity, I think, and also respect for their environment. It's a very low impact place. So you've got your clubhouse, there's a small patio, a barbecue area, a sun lawn, of course, with a small pool, open air swimming pool in the corner, then a couple of a mini 10 court, a bowls court, and what else is there? A couple of little outhouse buildings, and then just lots of dense foliage, kind of mossy paths through the trees. There's a small stream running through. But yeah, very compared perhaps to some, it might be at the kind of smaller scale end of things. I think currently there's about 40 or 50 members. In their heyday, there would have been a couple of hundred. From the moment I stepped in, a wonderful, welcoming bunch of people.
Interesting. So you're an artist in residence. Now, I happen to know what that means, but for some of the listeners who might not, can you describe that?
Yeah, an artist in residence is sort of an annoyingly ambiguous term, but I often find the kind of richness of the role, as it's something I've done a number of times, can be to its benefit. But essentially it means you as an artist are hosted by somewhere, by perhaps an organisation or a location. That might be, in this case, a naturist club, or previously for me it's been a university or a gallery. And any scale of organisation can see the benefit in inviting an artist in, for them to make work in that place and about that place too. And that might be all sorts of things. It may be that you sit outside and make paintings of the buildings. It may be that you are in deep conversations with the people who come through that place. It may be that you find a bolt hole and hide away there and make work in private. It may be a very, very public role where you're almost like a kind of you have a sort of a very definite community role. But basically, you are out of your normal comfort zone as an artist. You're out of your studio. This new place becomes your studio. And no, go ahead. I find that the work becomes better for it. You have to use your kind of practical faculties, your thinking, hit the ground running, and end up making things that surprise you because they are now influenced by something new to you, although you've used your artistic faculties that you've honed already to make sense of this new place. So I didn't start there as an artist in residence. I've done a number before, and often someone puts a call out. They say, we're looking for an artist in residence. Would you like to apply? As I believe Bare Oaks have done themselves, and I've been talking to Teresa, the programmer of that organisation, as well. And so they can put a call out and say, here is the brief, here's the situation, here's what we can offer, here's what we expect from you. That transaction is quite key. And you then sometime later you arrive and you have your set period of time to work. In this instance, it started more as a little research project. I'd emailed them asking if I could come and talk to them about how the club operates. And then I realised that after being there, visiting a couple of times, I'd started to want to just make work there as a method of that research. And it suddenly started to seem like this was actually a residency. And what that does is it formalises things in the ways I've described, really. It just gives everyone a clearer footing and a heightened expectation, and also just a more interesting story. It gives everyone a bit more to think about, myself included.
So in the case of Bare Oaks, we have a 10-day residence that's organized by Teresa. We did a podcast, a couple podcasts actually, the first year we did that. And so it's a very structured program. Was that the case? Was there a structured artist in residence program at Oakwood, or did you create it yourself?
I guess I did. And it will be entirely up to them as to whether they want to repeat the experience. I'm very lucky that it's open-ended anyway. So that's as I say, artists in residence roles vary with every place they're hosted, really, or even then every residency. Each of your resident artists will have got a different experience, even within the same structure, or use that structure differently. Likewise, every place I've being hosted as an artist in residence has felt very different with a different structure. And yeah, it's complicated a bit more by the fact that in many ways I'm also hosted by this organisation called Radical Essex. So that was my way into the project. And Radical Essex is a season of events, a program of commissions and talks and artist projects run by a gallery called Focal Point in Southend, who are at the very eastern coastal side of Essex, and they were funded to run a project that mixed tourism and art. So to see what would happen if you mix those two audiences and locations and kind of approaches. So I started by talking to them. I'm from Essex myself. I don't know if you've any idea what Essex means or kind of stands for, but in a way, the Radical Essex project was trying to counter the reputation that county has within England. And as someone who grew up there, I'm sort of aware of those. There's sometimes maybe there's a Canadian equivalent, but it's being next to the city. It's often where people would leave. If they've earned a bit of money, they might leave and go and build themselves a big house in the countryside in Essex. So there's a reputation for being quite brash or showing off or overconfident, unfairly. It's maligned, I suppose, is what is the issue, and as a very narrow. They're the butt of jokes, literally. Essex men, Essex girls, things like that. They call them in England structured reality program, a bit like maybe in America there's like Jersey Shore or the Hills, things like that. There's one called The Only Way is Essex, which follows the relationships of kind of overprivileged, rich. Yeah. Working class 20-somethings and their relationships. Anyway, so
I'm imagining it's probably the suburban upper middle class, exactly. Not real world. At least that's the reputation, right? That it's not a real place. It's where people go, where they can show off a bit, perhaps when they've got some money. Is that what the reputation?
Yeah, there's a bit of that. Although, of course, the county is way wider and broader than that. There's poverty. Right. There's suburbs. There's also beautiful landscape. There's a rich history as well. So Radical Essex interest was in uncovering some of that history. Some of it based on tourism. Some of it based on locations people would not normally have access to, like in this example, the Oakwood Naturist Park. So I, for a number of reasons, was interested in examining that sort of story. A number of residencies I'd done before were in Scandinavia, where social nudity, mixed sex nudity, is much more normalised. So I'd kind of been interested in what that means and what is it in Britishness that finds that prospect so unpalatable, or for some people horrifying or daunting, and others not. And also I've been making a lot of work interested in ideas of kind of retreat or escape into nature or into solitude. So when I realised that they'd already uncovered that the first naturist club in England was in Essex in 1926, that immediately kind of drew me in, and I started talking to them, and then that led a few months later to me writing emails to the 3 remaining naturist clubs in Essex and asking if they were happy for me to come and talk to them. One didn't reply. One did reply and said, "We're not really interested. We're not looking for any more publicity. We're not. We're not interested in taking part." Which I totally understand and accept. But luckily for me,
I think it's a mistake. But all right, yes.
Sure. I mean, interestingly, kind of one of the themes has been, ideas I've been thinking about a lot is this idea of being seen, not being seen, seclusion, visibility, and the kind of pros and cons of both of those standpoints, and also the massive overlaps in that sort of thing. You know, that it is, clubs are normally secluded, but it's all about, but there's a to be visible or to see each other is also a very important kind of thing. Mm-hmm. To achieve. So anyway, that luckily Oakwood said, their reply to my email was, "Oh, what a fascinating project. That sounds wonderful. We'd love to meet you. Please do come along. we like guests to come on a Sunday, so why don't you come along? There'll be more people there. And so within a fortnight, I think I'd ended up going over and visiting, and yeah, they were super welcoming, and I had lots of conversations. I was kind of dashing around, sitting with different people after being introduced to them by the club secretary, with my notepad and chatting away, and yeah, had a super productive first half hour, and then on, and I was there all day talking to people.
Well, I've looked at the Radical Essex website, and it makes me want to go and tour there. There's all kinds of places I'm seeing that, at least to me, appeal to me. And I like history. I like some of the more oddities of things that people have built, and that kind of thing. So it's fascinating. But focusing on the naturist aspect, because obviously that's what we're about. Were you a naturist before?
No, and I wouldn't. Would I say I am now? Certainly I've experienced that lifestyle now more than I would have if I hadn't done this project. But I don't think I wouldn't say I'd. I mean, you may be a better judge, but I wouldn't say I'd probably bought into the lifestyle. But certainly I feel very comfortable there. It's still kind of there is still a challenge to go, when I go there, and to then undress and be around other people. Obviously that challenge is massively dissipated, and immediately all the things you say about you stop noticing after a while, and everyone's very relaxed and welcoming, and nobody's as friendly as a group of naturists, and all of that is true. But yeah, equally time-wise and commitment to other things and whatever, I couldn't say I take part entirely. But I had, as I said, had experience of that kind of stepping through a kind of threshold into social nudity with residencies in Sweden and Finland and Germany too. Northern Europe. It's odd. We are an odd anomaly for having quite a similar temperature climate to have had that kind of Victorian detour away from kind of understanding and accepting our own and each other's bodies. I do find that fascinating that with that little kind of bubble of exception to the rest of Northern Europe.
So, but what do you think it was that there's lots of places in Radical Essex, but you chose, or you were intrigued by the idea of doing an artist in residence in a naturist club. Why do you think that was? What fascinated you about that?
I think in essence because there was it already just in that, by definition, artist in residence at a naturist club seemed like such a potent idea, and there were, I'd not, up until I discovered the residency you were running and Teresa were running together, I'd not heard of one. So I was intrigued by is it even possible to take place, I suppose, so it felt almost in some ways perhaps unfeasible, so therefore worth a try. And then also that I thought, because of the previous experience I've talked about, I could probably try and step up to that opportunity, and face off with some of those kind of daunting prospects, or equally whatever difficulties there are. The projects, with every residency, with every artist project, with every piece of work any of us take on, there'll be innate challenges, and I thought one of them might be working with a group of an existing community, whether the naturism thing would become a helpful or maybe an obstacle. Equally, regardless of whether people were stripping off or not, I'm still there talking to a group of people who don't know me, who maybe have no interest in art, or no interest in local history, or no interest in what I might be trying to do. So, naturism aside, there were challenges involved, and productive challenges, wonderful kind of provocative and exciting challenges.
How long have you been there?
Well, my first visit was at the end of the summer of 2016.
Oh.
And then that led to there was a couple of visits then. So I've really had a luxury of this being a very slow burn residency, as we're now, just sadly gone past the end of summer 2017. So as the summer was drawing to a close, I realised, oh right, it looks like I'm going to have to roll this over into 2018 too. So, and luckily I've been, the club and also Radical Essex have been very tolerant of that kind of slow burn process, which is quite unusual for a residency, because normally you try and put some limit on it just to make sure that people are thinking about outcomes and you're not testing anyone's patience. But as I've been, hopefully quite conscientious of checking in with those sorts of issues throughout, it feels like, yeah, we can roll this over. So generally some residencies you would have a fixed amount of time like yours, and you will be there from day one to the final day. Other residencies I've done, and including this one, is you dip in and out, and you treat that as a kind of, you've scattered that residency time across a longer period of time. So I was going once a month, trying to go once a month, not every month, from that time onwards. Generally, of course, it's quieter in winter. I think there were a few months off last winter, and there will be this winter. Actually, I haven't been there for a couple of months now. Time gets in the way. I've got a 1.5-year-old daughter. There's other projects to do, but as I say, luckily everyone's very tolerant of that. So I'm sort of actually now at a process of, having done a number of projects whilst I've been there, making work on site and back in my studio. I'm now in a sort of useful, consolidation period, I suppose, of trying to work out, right, I can probably not push this any further than next summer. So what are we going to do? How are we going to go out with a bang, or with something that certainly feels like I've done it justice, which is always the anxiety with these sorts of things. Have you really sucked everything out of it as much as possible?
So was it what you expected, or were you surprised by anything?
Yeah, so a bit of both. Yes, it was a small patch of land with a clubhouse and naked people wandering around. In many ways, it was exactly what I'd envisaged. But I suppose what I'd not envisaged was, one, how generous people would be with their time. Two, how it was actually about way more than the nudity, and the members of the club there, whether some there are still founder members, who've been going pretty much every week since 1963. Others joined last year or 2 years previously, and every gap in between. That even with that kind of happily they are still gaining members. There is a very tight group of friends, who really appreciate seeing each other at the end of a week, and that sense of community, aside from the nudity, is perhaps something I didn't quite expect. I thought it might be, we turn up, we get the lounger out, we open the Kindle or the book and sit down and do a crossword, and then with some small talk we'll head home at the end of the day. But it's a very, very, very strong community feeling and group of long-standing friends.
And you're there. You're not staying overnight. You're just there for Davis. Is that right?
Yeah, there isn't a resident. You can't stay there overnight. It's not a residential club, if that's the right phrase. Oh. So it is pretty much as I've described, all the kind of facilities and buildings there. So it's you drive up on the morning, you unpack your boots, and get your stuff out for the day, and then generally by about 6 in the evening, the sun's setting, you pack up your stuff and you drive away, and everyone's had a good a day as possible. It's a kind of daytime activity. I mean, there are social events in the evenings. As a member, you can come and go as you please. Everyone's got the codes and the locks for the doors, so it is open all day, 24/7 in that sense. But yeah, not about living there. It is somewhere you visit, I suppose. I don't know if psychologically there's an important difference there, perhaps, but it certainly seems to provide everything people need.
Well, it's just there's many different natures clubs, as I'm sure you understand now. What's interesting though is the difference, and I'd be curious. Because in our residency, the whole idea is to this intense 10-day try to live without clothes 100% of the time, even if it's cool kind of thing. Most of the artists realize they're there to kind of push the boundaries a bit and see what it's like. So they're living, eating, doing everything without clothes, and then questioning why they need clothes or when they need clothes or the meaning and that kind of thing. What kind of work has resulted from what you've done and these experiences?
Yeah, it's interesting, that difference in format. And I think what you offer is a very different experiment, if you like. I mean, from the first day, on my first day visiting there, as I say, I was kind of moving around, chatting to people, taking notes, and I was fully clothed. I was there in chinos and a button-down shirt, and everyone else was pretty much naked. It's an English summer, so there were various amounts of clothes on because there's always a bit of a chill in the air, unfortunately. So there's something inherently optimistic, I think, about a British naturist club, because there's precious few days in the year that are truly kind of ideal. But halfway through that day, I remember I was asked whether I wanted to make up a doubles in Mini 10, and I figured, okay, right, here's a useful kind of fork in the road point. I guess I'd love to take part. That's really lovely that they've invited me to join in, but also here's an ideal kind of moment to bite the bullet and win in Rome. And if I start playing tennis, I've not even got a moment to be self-conscious about it. So I stripped off there and then put my clothes in a pile on the picnic table and sort of strolled off with them into the through the trees and over to the mini 10 court. So I did have that kind of immersion challenge, if you like. But as I say, yeah, I get to kind of go home and then try again another day, and it's sort of led me to one. I've been making these interviews with members there. I'm a bit of a one for feedback forms and questionnaires, so I've often turned up with a small questionnaire of different questions that I've handed out to people. Some have wanted to fill them in, others not. And yes, we've had some really interesting results to those questions. And then also generally with my residencies, I quite like to try a technique I've never tried before. So up the ante of that sort of out of the comfort zone. And for a number of, and generally those processes are based on what I'm thinking about in that location. So I guess by definition, my working methods would change, or I'm certainly really open to that. So I've been trying out cyanotype photography or sonography, which is using chemically treated paper that is responsive to the UV rays of the sun, where you can use a UV sun lamp. And it's pretty much like the first photography. So you lay things over this treated paper, bring them out into the strong sunlight, and their shadows will not react because there's no UV. Where it does react goes a deep blue. So you may have seen these cyanotypes, cyan as in that kind of vivid mid blue, white for the shadows and blue for the other shapes. So you can try it with a leaf or a feather or any shape, and then more complex things I've been using type and letters and bodies as well. We did a really nice one stood around in a circle having a chat, happened to be standing on a sheet of treated paper, so there's a really nice one of kind of a huddle of toes and wonky feet and shadows and things like that. And then books as well from the library. I've been making cyanotypes of those. So again, this idea of sort of seeing and not seeing, they're really sharp records of exactly what object was on that bit of paper. But in the case of a book, you've no idea what's in that book or even what's on the cover. So sort of floating in between this idea of kind of revealing and hiding. And so it's been really nice to try those. They're also surprisingly sort of participatory in that I'll be making them in the... What I quite like is that there is no studio. Obviously, they weren't expecting an artist in residence to turn up. So I just used a bit of the darkest table, the shadiest, gloomiest table in the corner of their clubhouse to assemble the cyanotypes and bring them out. And generally, when I'm doing that, someone will have walked over and said, "Oh, Barry, what are you up to at the moment? What's this one going to be?" So it's been a really nice way of seeing. Of me engaging with them and them seeing how an artist works and seeing the process, revealed. And then when they're finished and I treat them, then they're interested in seeing the results. So that in a way that my making process has been revealed as well. And then all sorts of other things. I've been taking other photographs as well, although the cyanotypes emerged as a process because I was wary of bringing a camera in for obvious reasons. So often cyanotype photography is called cameraless photography because there is no lens needed. It is just exposing the paper to the light source with nothing in between except the objects. So it was kind of interesting to think about using methods that suited that, and also that actually people were making these sort of photographic experiments when in 1926, when this club was around. There were sort of people like Man Ray and modernist photographers were experimenting in exactly the same way. So it's kind of as much as the club has a wonderful timeless quality, I'm hoping in a way so do these photo prints. And also, yeah.
You've also done some research as part of the radical Essex. I was intrigued about the story of Ursula Bloom. Do you want to tell me a little bit more about that?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I should caveat that by saying it's a sort of, it's not certain, but as with some of the story of the growth of the naturist movement, a lot of it is there's not a exacting paper trail. There is a kind of air of mystery and uncertainty to all of these things, which I find very evocative and fascinating. But and anonymity has often been quite has for reasons good and bad had to go alongside the movement. And Ursula Bloom, it is thought through some, not my own research, but someone I've been talking to, a naturist historian, had uncovered a something of a paper trail about kind of land ownership that seemed like Ursula Bloom, who was a sort of prolific writer and author of her day in the 20s up till her death, I think in the 70s or 80s.
1984.
Thank you. She wrote numerous books, articles, romance novels was a big thing, would turn her hand to anything. In fact, I've found also an article in a very early copy of Health and Efficiency, the English naturist magazine, her first visit to a naturist club, which I have reason to believe is not her first visit to a naturist club, but was kind of written in that guise. And actually, that's one of my sort of sub themes of the residency, is an interest in that genre of my first visit to a naturist club writing. There's so many articles out there which follow exactly the same arc of the kind of trepidation through the gates, coming to a realization at the end that it wasn't so bad after all. Anyway, but yeah, she was. It seems like she owned the land on which the first naturist club, which was called Munella, was built in the countryside of Essex in 1926, and she may have been, and Munella was the pseudonym of the owner of that club, founder owner of that club, and it seems like that may have been Ursula Bloom, and the club folded a couple of years later, and that coincides with the time she married a naval officer and then had to leave the country and travel the world following him around. And yeah, with that article as well, it seemed like there's enough lines crossing that we might conjecture, and I never say this, with certainty, but that Ursula Bloom was the kind of mother of English naturism, you might say. None of this is written with any kind of salaciousness. It's as a kind of that she may have an important and pivotal role, and in many ways, actually, in another kind of interesting counter-intuition and contradiction, the closing of that club was actually the birth of the movement, because it meant that so many clubs were started up by ex-members nearer their own homes. So probably 5 or 6 naturist clubs would then emerge once that one had stopped, almost like a kind of act of pollination. So the movement started as soon as that one had to stop. So yeah, she's a fascinating woman. In England, she's called the Barbara Cartland of Essex, referred to, whether that means anything. But there might be, you might say Jackie Collins, or think of a very prolific, dash it off in a few weeks novelist, and with a massive kind of biography.
So how does this story fit in with what you've been doing with your role as artist in residence and your your program with Essex?
Well, one of the outcomes is also talks. So kind of talking, I've found, even in this instance, talking about the residency has a kind of currency and potency. So people are interested in what I'm doing and how it's being run and what happens and the kind of what is going on there, what is he up to. And so even anecdotally, I talk socially to people about this project I'm doing, and their ears prick up, and so they have so many questions, and there's something, even though this is a kind of overlooked bit of British culture, actually people are super fascinated by it, particularly if they're not involved at all. So that, like, having conversations with people up to giving formal lectures about it has been an absolute constant of the residency. So she features in that history, and I suppose also thematically in this idea of what is ambiguous or mysterious or hidden and revealed. She kind of fits into that story, but also that from then till now, actually there is this wonderful timeless quality that I'm sure that Munella Club would not have been very different from the Oakwood Club, certainly, that I'm going to now, where there's some space outside with direct access to sunlight to lie down, relax amongst nature, a little bit of facilities to have a cup of tea, to sit down, have a chat with each other, maybe a little recreational facility. There's something wonderfully unchanged from then to now.
So, as you said, you've been speaking and doing presentations on Radical Essex, which presumably includes the Oakwood Sun Club, and
absolutely.
People are interested in whether they're naturists or not. What's their reaction?
It varies, and I can never, conversationally, it's a thing where you can never quite tell. But some people there's a shock, or there's a incredulity to what on earth are you doing this time, Barry, or how fascinating. It comes out with stories. Oh, actually, my parents were naturists. Something they'd never bothered to mention to me before, or we had that holiday one year at that place, how does that work? So many questions about the practicalities. We also had an open day. The Oakwood Club has an open, as many naturist clubs do, has an open day once a year, and so we jointly hosted that with them and ran a few events and workshops there. So I got to invite people to come through the gates for the first time, as I had, and that was really nice, introducing people totally unfamiliar with it to the club environment, to the people there, and obviously they got the same warm welcome. And it was interesting that they'd also, in the space of that afternoon, gone through in many ways the same arc as I'd gone through, because actually by the end of the afternoon, everyone I'd invited had gone from sort of nervously sat around and chatting to people to being naked by the end and taking part in we all actually ended up in the pool by the end. So everyone had got to the point of, that certainly wasn't my ambition, but it was a really nice marker that everyone who was there was relaxed enough to want to try, with absolutely no pressure to have to. So there is something kind of, my line with the project is not evangelical, but it's certainly what if we treat this subject openly, and these ideas kind of without ridicule or absurdity. There is in England, because of our there's a kind of the tongue-in-cheek, the Victorian attitude, the carry-on film kind of comedy level of it. It's often naturists and nudists are treated looked at kind of humorously, or absurdly or suspiciously. So I've one of my guiding lines of the project has been to avoid those paths, and kind of find new territory to discuss these issues with, I suppose.
Yeah, well, you actually, in September, you did an exhibit strictly on a naturist club in Essex, and it had a magazine, right?
Well, yeah, that's something I developed actually for the open day, and it just because I had been, even though the project has been about trying to sensitively deal with imagery, I did realise I had quite a lot of visual outcomes. So the cyanotypes, the forms, the forms are kind of visible objects. The photographs I'd been taking of the grounds without people in, which had a really nice kind of quality to them. They could show them the kind of the points where the man-made environment and nature had overlapped in a really beautiful kind of harmonious way. So initially I just started to slot them all into one of those online photo books you can make and send off for, and realised the more I did it, actually it was becoming quite interesting to leave all the text out, see how these images sit alongside each other, and I'd been working quite speculatively with this thing, and I had the luxury of doing so. But things were coalescing once I laid out a magazine, once I kind of laid them in order, or I had one image from one series of activities facing another. So realised that the magazine had a nice kind of quality, and also that for some reason also the magazines have been a backbone of the movement since the start. Health and efficiency in England has been going for over 100 years, and it started as purely a fitness magazine, but by the 30s was pretty much predominantly advocating the naturist lifestyle. So it's interesting how, for something quite hidden and about physical experience, magazines have always been there in the movement. So it sort of seemed fitting to try and put things into that. So at the moment it's an edition of 2. Actually, I printed 2 up. So it's not magazine in the sense that you'll find it in a newsagent or there's loads of copies to distribute at the moment. It's an object itself. But yeah, it worked well. So I hope to produce it in greater numbers, and that will be available to kind of access or buy but that's a longer project, and a fundraising project as well, which is another area I'm in at the moment. But yeah, it's nice to. It's been interesting. I've been collecting health and efficiencies from every decade via eBay, and they occasionally crop up. I mean, there's a lot on eBay actually, but the older decades are much harder. But I managed to win a copy of a 1922 edition earlier this morning, so that was quite a result. And a 1970s one turned up as well, so I was missing one of those. So it's been interesting to kind of chart the history of the movement through that magazine, which is only a narrow viewpoint of the culture, of course, but is still an interesting timeline in itself. So there's an archive quality to the project as well, I suppose.
Yeah, I'm sure you're aware that there's always been, and I think still is, a bit of a controversy with regards to health and efficiency in terms of the visuals that they use, the imagery that they use. So.
It's a very interesting question. Yeah, we can go into that or not, but yeah, what I will say is that yes, from other naturist magazines I've been able to look at, they're actually quite a nice little library of magazines and back issues at Oakwood Sun Club. They have a little reading area, so it's been useful to see others. They have the British Naturism official magazine, whereas Health and Efficiency does have there'll be paid models and kind of people who wouldn't classify themselves perhaps as naturists have been paid to appear on the cover, say, and also the adverts in the back can be for all sorts of things that you might not think are linked to the movement, or tenuously linked perhaps. But interesting, looking back at the 20s and 30s and 40s editions, there's also stories that may be only tangentially related. There'll be products in the back that are slightly of kind of uncertain provenance, you might say. So there'll be lotions and potions and I can make you grow taller machines and things like that. So actually I quite like how, in a way, how, if not totally representative, how sort of partial in a way that story, for a magazine to go for that long is quite phenomenal.
It is. It is the oldest magazines by far, continuously publishing magazine in the world.
And you might say some of that longevity has been put down to some of the kind of glamorous models they put on the cover, but that sort of survival strategy. But either way, that kind of it's quite a nice tangible line for me to trace, at least by just collecting them from that time and then looking at the source material. So we'll see where that goes.
Yeah, it has its market, and obviously it succeeds. Whether that's the imagery that people want is probably a topic for an entire separate episode of this show that we could debate at some point, which might be interesting.
Sure,
it's not the only magazine to have had that criticism or gone through this similar debates throughout history.
No.
It's a recurring theme. So,
and also it's had various editors with different editorial policies as well. So I think it should be said that each editor is dealing with its own publishing context and also and with their own motivations. So some decades have been very different to others, you might say.
Right. So I'm going to put you a bit on the spot here.
Sure.
There are lots of thousands, tens of thousands of people listening to the show, and many of them are members of clubs, and there are a number of people who are actually running clubs. Why would they want to have an artist in residence, and what's the advantage?
Wow, interesting question. I mean, for one thing, I should perhaps say that I kind of engineered this residency in reverse. So I went to them and said, after I'd been talking to them, I said, look, could we call this, my regular visiting, an artist in residence role? So after trying to explain to them what an artist in residence means, and I don't know whether I may would have done a better or worse job of that today with you, but that after that negotiation, and then them saying, yeah, well, look, we don't have to, because I was funded by Radical Essex, all they had to offer me was their time and space, which came as second nature to them anyway. As I say, they're very welcoming. And perhaps a little bit of tolerance of me taking up a table and making a slight mess and then tidying it away, or getting in the way of making sunlight experiments in the middle of their sun lawn, stuff like that. But no, I think for one, it's brought more people have gained awareness of the club just because it was also been marketed via the Radical Essex mailing list, and the different people I'm talking to it about. I mean, I find regardless of if it's a naturist club, there's a place can benefit from an artist in residence by, you have someone coming from the outside who's trying to quite quickly understand how you operate. They're gonna and normally be quite open with their working methods. So you're going to see how you represent yourselves to them reflected back at you. So that kind of self-awareness is quite interesting and useful. And also, if you're happy to go along with this trust relationship, you're both, the artist and the host, are going to end up somewhere neither of them expected. If a residence is successful, I always think that's kind of the marker of it working well, and that each side has been able to offer something to each other. And you can't, if you don't know where that is and you've got the luxury of the time and space to achieve that, then that can be really wonderful. And perhaps, also if these are two, it's interesting that the art world and the naturist world have got lots in common as well, in their interest in, they can be more secluded and more closed off than they realise, but equally they want to appeal to new audiences all the time. There are codes of conduct that one might think is very accessible but actually isn't. There's an interesting kind of thinking that things are very easily evident initially, but with more digging you find out much more. I don't know, I could go on and on, but there's, I think in particular art and naturist movement, I've found lots of interesting parallels. And also, I don't know, perhaps there's something about the nature of that kind of seclusion that a residency role can bring about opening up. So that's been useful. But, ultimately it would be better to talk to the people at Oakwood. My estimation of the success of the project is not the only one. So Oakwood would also have something to say about that. But they do seem happy with things progressing so far.
So let's assume you've convinced them, and that somebody out there, and it could be in Australia or in Canada or the United States, they're excited by the idea. How would you suggest they go about organizing it and finding that artists or artists?
It is a tough one. It's easier said than done, and that hosting, albeit potentially quite simple, is as in terms of it can be undemanding. If it goes along with the things you were doing already, then it can be a breeze and a pleasure. You, of course, as a host as well, would have lots to contribute to this conversation as well, I'm sure. But it would be worth talking to arts organisations firsthand. You know, you need to know. Each artist will have different needs, but to get an overview of what those needs might be would be the best place to start. So talking to perhaps a local art school or arts organisation, and you will, most naturist clubs will at least have a closest arts organisation. So talk to them, pick their brains about how they work and what artists might need. Talk to artists before you set things up. You know, it's nice to develop it in that way first. And also, once it's up and running, be open to those changes. You know, I find it's best not to be too fixed about things. But ultimately, if you can offer someone time, space, encouragement, a welcome, and are very clear about where that begins and ends, it's really useful to know how much you can be offered. And I mean that sort of structurally and emotionally, but also financially. I personally can't afford to undertake a residency if there's no money involved coming my way. You know, you can have residencies you pay for, but either if it's set up well, you can come, but you'll have to fundraise yourself to come here, then sure, that's brilliantly open about the process. But some you will get a stipend, you'll get a fee, you'll get your travel covered. Obviously, it depends on the scale of that organisation, and each artist and organisation gets to decide what they're willing to invest. But yeah, an open communication is probably the key.
Yeah, and there certainly are, I'm sure in the UK, like there are in Canada, various organizations who will help support artists and help fund projects as well.
Yeah, and you might, yes, of course. I mean, the Arts Council in England would be you know, somewhere you'd go, or even you know, if you want to get things more involved, you know, maybe there's a local sponsor, you want to think about funding it and what they might get out of it. Yeah, there's different ways of working it out. Best not to rush in, and then also, you know, be aware of what you want to, as well as what you're able to put in, is what you want to get out. And I do find, in my experience, you know, the less concrete that is, it's nice to have some flexibility there. It's good to have targets so everyone knows where they are, but flexibility is great. So you know that, you know, because it is all about embracing the uncertainties and the unknowns of this new relationship. You need to be open to those as well and see those as positives. So not to be very fixed with what, you know, we want something this size in this time scale on this budget to be done by the end, please. Because often I find the residency time is when everything changes and you throw everything up in the air, and that's all wonderful. But often actually the concrete results may come in the year after that residency. And that's not a bad thing. That's wonderful, and that's how things grow and nurture and thrive. But and hopefully that relationship will have continued in some way, so you will also feel involved in that result afterwards. You know, I'm sure the artist, you know, now it's 2 years in, I think, to your residency there.
Yes.
You've now got 20 odd artists perhaps who've come through there. I'm sure their work is still kind of reeling in a way from the influence of their time with you. And yeah, you know, no doubt there were results on day 10 or whatever your final day was, but there'll certainly be greater results coming over the next.
So if you want to see some of the work, you can go to his Instagram account. I'll put a link in the show notes, or look up radicalessex.uk. And Oakwood Sun Club, nice little club. If you're in the UK, nice place to visit. I'll put a link to that in the show notes as well. And if you are in a club somewhere, I encourage you to invite the artists in your area to participate. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid if it's weird, it's unusual. That's what makes it interesting. As they learn about you and you learn about them, you will both learn about each other. It can add a lot of interest, and it can be an effective tool for getting a little bit more promotion and attention. Artists are great communicators. That's what they do. That is their job. That is what they are working towards when they create art. So Look into it, consider it, invite the artists. But remember, having the artist doesn't mean you have to compromise on your values. We always insist that we are a naturist environment, and the first thing that I do with the artists is I explain what our philosophy is, what ethical naturism means at Bare Oaks, and we expect them to participate because that's why they come. They don't just come to watch. We're not just life models. We want them to become part of what we are so they understand, and therefore they can communicate through their art better what we're about and how we are trying to be different in society and improve society. What we do may not be normal, but we do think it is more natural, or the natural way to be. So that'll be all for this episode of the Naturist Living Show. Thank you so much for listening. My name again is Stéphane Deschênes. I'm your host for this podcast and the owner of Bare Oaks Family Naturist Park. And I make this podcast with a lot of help from Sean Mitchell, who does all the editing for the show, and so makes it possible for me to keep going and keep bringing you these episodes. You can find link on the show notes, which is on our website at naturistliving, one word, .bareoaks, B-A-R-E, of course, .ca. You can send comments to naturistliving, one word, at bareoaks.ca, and you can call our toll-free line and leave a message, or call the regular line, or Skype us. Skype is Bare Oaks. Phone number is 905-473-6060, country code 1, or toll-free North America 1-888-373-9124, extension 333. And if I've said that too quickly, the numbers are listed on the show website as well. I hope you enjoyed this latest episode and that you'll join us for the next episode of the Naturist Living Show.
This episode of the Naturist Living Show was brought to you by Bare Oaks Family Naturist Park. Traditional naturist values in a modern setting. Traditional values means that naturism is more than just taking your clothes off. It is a life philosophy with physical, psychological, environmental, social, and moral benefits. Bare Oaks Family Naturist Park strives to promote those naturist values in a modern setting that provides the amenities and services that our members and visitors expect. Free your body, free your mind. Learn more at www.bareoaks.ca.